Hello there, welcome to HFY Quantum Pro. Here, helping one another makes the universe smarter. So, what we are waiting for? Let's begin our story.
The scanner had been glitching all morning, and Olu was ready to shut it down and file a maintenance report. Every few minutes, it would ping with false readings from the debris field outside, picking up echoes of dead metal and frozen fuel lines. Nothing alive, nothing worth noting, just the graveyard of ships that had been floating in this corridor for decades. She almost missed it, a single blip buried beneath layers of static, so faint that any other healer would have dismissed it as background noise. But Olu had spent 40 years reading bioscans, and something about that blip made her stop. She adjusted the frequency, filtered the interference, ran it again, got a heartbeat slow, broken, barely there, but real. She contacted the bridge immediately. Commandant Severa responded with her usual dry tone, asking if Olu had finally lost her patience with the equipment. But when Olu sent the scan data directly to her console, the line went quiet for a long time. Within the hour, the general passage repositioned toward the source. A retrieval team in full hazard suits pulled a battered cryopod from the twisted wreckage of a small ship. The pod was scratched and dented and covered in a layer of carbon scoring. Whatever had happened to the ship around it had been violent, but the pod itself had held. They brought it aboard and placed it in the quarantine bay. Ola was there waiting. She ran her scanner over the pod's cracked display panel and read what little data remained. Species: human. Single occupant. Cryosystem active, but failing. Estimated remaining function: 4 to 6 months. The word spread through the ship faster than Olu could have imagined. Human. They had found a living human. Crew members gathered near the quarantine bay windows, whispering to each other with wide eyes. Some refused to come closer than 20 meters. Others simply stared, as if they were looking at a monster sleeping inside a glass box. Olu understood their fear. Every Marithian child grew up learning about Death World species, and humans sat near the top of that list. Category 9 Apex Predators. Their home planet was a violent place of extreme weather, crushing gravity, and endless competition. Humans could run without stopping for hours. They healed from injuries that would kill most species. They ate the flesh of other creatures. They fought wars against each other for reasons that made no sense to anyone else. And somehow, they kept surviving. The databases made them sound like nightmares. Commandant Severa arrived at the quarantine bay with 2 armed guards. She stood at the observation window and looked at the pod for a long time. The frost on the glass was thick, but through it, they could see the shape of a face. Closed eyes, still features. A creature frozen between life and death. Severa turned to Olu. Can it survive transfer to a military station? No, Olu said. The cryo system is failing. If we move him now, the shock will kill him. Then we keep it contained. Triple barriers. Armed guard at all times. No one enters that bay alone. He needs medical attention, Olu said. If I do not stabilize the pod, he will be dead within months. Severa looked at her. There was something hard in her expression, but also something uncertain. Marithian law was clear on one point that even a commandant could not ignore. You did not abandon a living being in space. You did not let them die if you had the power to help. Do what you need to do, Severa said. But if that thing shows any sign of waking, you shut it down immediately. Olu agreed, though she was not sure she meant it. She spent the next several weeks working alone in the quarantine bay, surrounded by the hum of machines and the quiet rhythm of the human's heartbeat on her monitors. The cryopod systems were primitive by Marithian standards, but they were tough, built to survive exactly the kind of disaster that had destroyed the ship around them. Still, they were dying. Slowly, piece by piece, the pod was losing its ability to keep the human alive. Olu built a cradle. She used Marithian medical technology to create a hybrid life support system that wrapped around the pod like a second skin. It fed power into the failing cryo unit. It monitored the human's vitals with far greater precision than the original systems could manage. It kept his temperature stable, his brain activity low, and his damaged body in a state of deep, dreamless sleep. IT was delicate work. The human's biology was alien to her in ways she had not expected. His cellular structure was dense. His immune system was aggressive, constantly fighting even in stasis. His bones were thick and heavy, built for a world that pulled harder than anything she had known. But beneath all of that, beneath the raw, frightening toughness of him, there was something else. A fragility she had not anticipated. He was alone. He was broken. And without her help, he would simply stop. That on the 14th night, after the last adjustments were made and the cradle was humming steadily, Olu sat down in a chair beside the pod. The quarantine bay was empty. The guard stood outside. The ship was quiet. She looked at the human's face through the frosted glass. He looked young, though she could not be sure how age worked for his kind. His expression was peaceful. Whatever had happened to him, whatever fire or explosion or terrible moment had destroyed everything around him, he had slept through the aftermath. She placed one hand against the cold glass. "I do not know if you can hear me," she said softly, "but you are not alone anymore." The monitors beeped steadily in the silence. The human slept on. 312 days after they pulled the cryopod from the wreckage, a young technician named Finnick was assigned to the quarantine bay as Olu's assistant. He stood at the entrance for nearly 10 minutes before he could make himself walk through the door. The human was right there, sleeping behind glass and metal and glowing Marithium medical equipment, but still right there. Close enough that Finnick could see the rise and fall of his chest if he watched long enough. "He will not bite you," Olu said without looking up from her console. "He has been asleep for almost a full cycle." "That does not make me feel better," Finnick said. "Sleeping predators still have teeth." But he stayed. And over the following weeks, his terror slowly turned into something else. Curiosity. Finnick read everything in the ship's database about humans. He would sit at his workstation and scroll through entry after entry, his forearms fidgeting with nervous energy, and then he would turn to Olu and share what he had found. "Did you know they can keep running after their muscles start failing? Their brains override the pain and force their bodies to continue." "Yes," Olu would say. "Did you know their bones break and then grow back stronger than before? I've seen his scans." "Yes." "Did you know they form emotional bonds with almost anything? Other species, animals, even machines?" There are records of humans mourning broken tools. Olu paused at that one. She looked at the pod. "No," she said. "I did not know that." The months turned. The Gentle Passage continued its research mission through deep space, mapping stellar formations and collecting samples from dead worlds. But the quarantine bay had become the true center of the ship. Everyone knew about the sleeping human. Everyone had an opinion. Some crew members thought they should have let the pod fail and allowed nature to take its course. Others thought they should wake him immediately and ask him questions. A few, mostly the younger ones, pressed their faces to the observation window late at night and just watched him sleep. Olu noticed none of them used his designation. She had pulled it from the pod's damaged records weeks ago. Danny Reeves. A human name. Simple and short. But the crew called him the specimen, or the creature, or simply it. Olu called him Danny, only when she was alone with him. But she used his name. She talked to him every day. At first it was medical narration, describing what she was doing as she adjusted the cradle or checked his vitals. Then it became something more. She told him about the ship, about the stars they were passing, about Finnick's latest horrified discovery from the database. She told him about her own life, her training, the reason she had become a healer. She did not expect him to hear any of it. But something strange was happening. His heart rate changed when she spoke. Not dramatically, not enough to trigger any alarms, but enough for her instruments to detect. A slight quickening when her voice was near. A settling when she was quiet. As if some deep, buried part of his brain recognized that someone was there. She tested it carefully. She played different sounds near the pod. Engine noise, silence, recorded Marithian music, spoken words. His responses were consistent. He reacted most to voices, specifically to her voice. "He knows you are here," Finnick said one evening, staring at the data on his screen. "That should not be possible in cryo sleep. Human brains are different," Olu said. "Their neural activity does not fully stop the way ours does. There are layers, dreams perhaps, something beneath the ice. That is terrifying. I think it is sad," Olu said. Imagine being trapped in the dark for years, unable to move, unable to speak, but still somehow knowing that time is passing. Finnick had no answer for that. In the second year, Commandant Severa received a communication from Marithian Central Command. They wanted the human transported to a research facility on the inner worlds. Severa relayed the order to Olu. Moving him will destabilize the cradle, Olu said firmly. The hybrid system I built is calibrated to this ship's power grid. Transferring him to another vessel or station could cause a cascade failure. He would die. Severa studied her for a long moment. You're certain of this? I am. Whether Severa believed her completely or simply preferred not to deal with the political complications, she sent a response to Central Command citing medical risk and recommending the human remain aboard the Gentle Passage until his condition stabilized. The order was delayed. Not canceled. Delayed. Ola knew she was buying time. She did not know how much she had left, by the third year. Something new began happening. Olu was alone in the quarantine bay during the late shift, reading a medical journal on her tablet, when a soft sound made her look up. The monitors showed a small spike in neural activity. She walked to the pod and leaned close to the glass. Danny's fingers had moved. Not much. A slow curl, as if he were trying to grip something that was not there. Then they relaxed again. The movement lasted less than 2 seconds, and then he was still. Olu stared at his hand for a long time. Her own hearts were beating faster than they should have been. She looked at the security camera in the corner of the bay. She looked at the door, where the guard stood on the other side. She looked back at Danny's hand, now motionless against the lining of the pod. She said nothing. She told no one. She sat back down in her chair and placed her hand against the glass near his, and she stayed there until her shift ended. Something was changing inside that pod, and Olu was not ready for anyone else to know. The docking clamps locked with a deep metallic groan that shuddered through every corridor of the Gentle Passage. Outside the viewports, the Marithian supply station stretched wide and silver against the black, its ring of ports already crowded with smaller vessels. Resupply was supposed to take 4 days. It took less than one for the trouble to begin. Word about the sleeping human had leaked months ago through crew communications and personal messages sent home. By the time the Gentle Passage arrived at the station, half the sector seemed to know. Research teams from 3 other ships requested observation access. News channels on the inner worlds were running the story. And on the second morning of the docking, a shuttle arrived carrying Director Hali and 6 soldiers in full combat armor. Hali was tall even for a Marithian. His bioluminescent veins pulsed with a controlled, steady light that never flickered, which was a sign of someone who had trained himself to show no emotion. He walked through the ship as though he already owned it. And when he reached the quarantine bay, he stood at the observation window and studied the sleeping human the way someone might study a piece of machinery. Remarkable, he said. 7 years in failing cryo-sleep, and the creature is still alive. Your work, I understand. He looked at Olu. His name is Danny Reeves. Olu said, and yes, the hybrid life support cradle I built is what has kept him stable. Impressive. Hali folded 2 of his arms behind his back. The council has reviewed your reports. They are grateful for your efforts. However, the decision has been made to transfer the human to a secure facility on the inner worlds. The Division of Strategic Research will take custody. Strategic research, Olu repeated. You mean weapons development? Hali did not blink. I mean the division best equipped to study an organism of this classification. Understanding human biology could provide significant advantages in future defensive scenarios. He is not a weapon. He is a patient. He is a Category 9 predator from a death world, Healer Olu. Your attachment to him, while understandable, does not change what he is. The argument went nowhere. Hali had authority that outranked everyone on the ship except Severa herself, and even Severa's power had limits against a direct council order. Olu left the meeting feeling as if the floor had dropped out beneath her. It was Finnick who changed things, though he did not mean to. He had been working for weeks on the damaged data core recovered from the wreckage of Danny's ship. Most of the files were corrupted beyond repair, eaten by radiation and time. But Finnick was patient and clever with broken systems, and piece by piece, he pulled fragments back from the dead that he found personal logs. Short recordings made by the crew of the human vessel before whatever disaster had destroyed it. Most were damaged, but a handful were intact enough to play. He brought them to Olu late at night, when the quarantine bay was quiet and the guards were half asleep at their posts. The first recording was a woman's voice, laughing about a meal that had gone wrong in the ship's small kitchen. The second was two men arguing cheerfully about a game Olu did not understand. The third was Danny. His voice was warm and easy, nothing like what the databases suggested a Category 9 predator should sound like. He was talking to someone off-screen about a repair he had just finished. He made a joke. The other person laughed. Danny laughed too, a sound so natural and unguarded that Olu felt something tighten in her chest. These were ordinary people. They had eaten together, worked together, laughed together. And then something terrible had happened, and Danny was the only one left. Fennec also found photographs stored in the data core. A group picture of the crew standing together in front of their ship, arms around each other, smiling. A picture of Danny sitting alone on a cargo crate, reading something on a tablet, looking peaceful. A picture of a sunset on a world Olu did not recognize, taken through a ship's viewport, save because someone thought it was beautiful. Olu asked Fennec to compile everything into a single file. Then she requested a private meeting with Commandant Severa. She played the recordings in Severa's quarters. She showed her the photographs. She did not argue or plead. She simply let the evidence speak. Severa listened in silence. When the last recording ended, she sat still for a long time, her four hands resting on her knees, her bioluminescent veins flickering in a pattern Olu had never seen before. Something unsettled, something conflicted. "This does not change his classification," Severa said finally. "No," Olu agreed, "but it changes what we know about him." Severa used her authority to delay the transfer once more. She cited the fragility of the hybrid cradle systems, the risk of losing a unique scientific subject, and the need for further medical evaluation before transport. It was bureaucratic language designed to buy time without directly defying the council. Hali left the station angry. His soldiers filed back onto their shuttle in tight formation. Before he boarded, he turned back to Severa and said, in a voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "I will return with an order that cannot be delayed, Commandant. And when I do, the creature comes with me." The shuttle departed. The station grew quiet. The gentle passage undocked 2 days later and returned to the deep black. That night, Olu sat beside Danny's pod in the dim light of the quarantine bay. She pressed her hand to the glass and leaned close. "There are people coming for you," she whispered. "People who see you as something to be studied and taken apart. I will not let them. I do not know how, but I will not let them." The monitors beeped. Danny slept, and somewhere out among the stars, Hali was already drafting his next order. It started with a sound that did not belong. Olu was calibrating the cradle's nutrient feed during her night shift when a low, broken noise came from inside the pod. Not mechanical sound, not alert. A voice, muffled and distant and barely formed, like a word spoken underwater. She froze. Her instruments confirmed what her ears had told her. Neural activity had spiked to levels she had never recorded before. Not dangerous levels, not yet, but high, climbing. Danny Reeves was dreaming. She stood beside the pod and watched his face through the glass. His eyes moved beneath his closed lids, quick and restless. His lips parted slightly, and the sound came again. A murmur, something that might have been a name, though the translation systems could not decode it. Then it stopped. His vitals settled. The spike faded. He sank back down into the deep dark of cryo sleep, and the quarantine bay was silent again. Olu did not sleep that night. She sat at her console and reviewed 6 years of accumulated data, running the numbers again and again until she was certain. The hybrid cradle had done more than keep Danny alive. It had been healing him, slowly, silently, over years. His damaged tissues had regenerated. His fractured ribs had mended. The internal bleeding that had nearly killed him when they first found him had resolved completely. His body, aided by Marithian medical technology, but driven by its own relentless biology, had been putting itself back together while he slept. And now was waking him up? Not all at once. Not like flipping a switch. It was a gradual process, like a tide coming in. His brain was surfacing in waves, each one reaching a little higher before pulling back. The dreams were the first sign. The muscle movements she had hidden from the crew 3 years ago were another. His body was preparing itself for something his conscious mind did not yet know was coming. Olu faced a choice. She could suppress the process. A careful adjustment to the cradle's chemical feed would push him back under, keep him in stasis indefinitely. It would be safe, controlled. No one would panic. No one would have to decide what to do with a living, breathing, awake human on a ship full of people who were terrified of him, or she could let him wake. She thought about it for 3 days. She ate her meals in the quarantine bay. She ran simulations. She reviewed human medical literature that Finnick had painstakingly translated from the damaged data core. That on the 4th day, she made her decision. She adjusted the cradle. Not to suppress the awakening, but to support it. She widened the chemical parameters to allow his brain activity to rise naturally. She strengthened the nutrient feed to prepare his muscles for movement. She recalibrated the temperature controls to begin the long, careful process of bringing his body out of cryo. Then she told Severa. The commandant listened without interrupting. When Olu finished, Severa closed her eyes for a moment and pressed 2 of her hands together in a gesture that Marithians used when they needed to center themselves. How long? Severa asked. Days, perhaps a week. The process is unpredictable. Human biology does not follow our models. And when he wakes, what do we expect? I do not know, Olu said honestly. Confusion, certainly. Weakness. He has been in cryo for nearly 7 years. His last memory will be of whatever disaster destroyed his ship. He will be disoriented and frightened. Or aggressive, Olu admitted. But his body will be weak. He will not be able to stand on his own for some time. Severa activated the ship-wide alert system. She did not announce what was happening publicly, but she placed the gentle passage on heightened security. Guards at the quarantine bay were doubled. Medical teams were placed on standby. Emergency containment protocols were reviewed and loaded into the system, ready to activate at a moment's notice. The crew felt the tension immediately. Whispers spread. Finnick, who knew everything because he was always in the quarantine bay, looked like he might pass out when Olu told him. He is waking up, he repeated, as if saying it again would make it less real. The Category 9 is waking up. Danny is waking up, Olu corrected gently. Over the next 5 days, the signs grew stronger. Danny's breathing deepened. His heart rate increased by small but steady increments. His fingers moved more frequently now, curling and uncurling against the pod's lining. Once, his right hand lifted entirely and pressed flat against the glass before dropping back. The guards watched this with wide, fearful eyes. Several requested reassignment. Severa denied all of them that on the 6th day. Danny made a sound that the entire quarantine bay could hear. A groan, low and rough and unmistakably human. It echoed off the metal walls and sent the nearest guard stumbling backward. Olu was at his side in seconds. His vitals were spiking. Brain activity was surging in patterns she had never seen before, complex and layered and racing toward full consciousness. His body temperature was climbing. His muscles were tensing. Finnick stood behind her, his 4 arms wrapped around himself, staring at the pod with an expression that was equal parts terror and wonder. Is it happening? He whispered. Not yet, Olu said. Soon, but not yet. She stayed that night. She brought a blanket and a chair and set up beside the pod as the ship's lights dimmed to their night cycle. The guards rotated shifts. Finnick eventually fell asleep at his workstation. The ship hummed around them. Olu watched Danny's face. The frost on the glass had thinned as the temperature inside the pod slowly rose. She could see him more clearly now than she ever had before. The details of his features, the stubble on his jaw, the small scar above his left eyebrow, that he was real. After all these years, after all the data and the readings and the arguments, He was about to become real in a way that none of them were prepared for. She placed her hand against the glass one more time. "I will be right here," she said. "When you open your eyes, I will be the first thing you see. And I need you to know that you are safe. Whatever happens, you are safe." The monitors beeped. Danny's hand pressed against the glass from the other side, matching hers, and Olu waited. Every alarm in the quarantine bay screamed at once. Olu jolted awake in her chair, the blanket falling to the floor. The overhead lights had switched to emergency red, painting the room in sharp crimson pulses. Monitors flashed. The guards at the door raised their weapons and pressed themselves against the walls, their bioluminescent veins flickering wild with panic. Fennec was already at the console, his 4 hands flying across the controls. Neural activity is off the charts. Heart rate climbing. Body temperature approaching baseline human normal. "Olu, it is happening." Right now, Olu was on her feet and at the pod before he finished speaking. Through the glass, she saw movement. Real movement. Not the slow twitch of a finger or the flutter of eyelids. Danny's chest rose with a deep, shuddering breath. His head turned. His jaw tightened. His hands gripped the lining of the pod as though he were trying to hold onto something solid. Then his eyes opened brown, dark and unfocused, and filled with confusion. They blinked against the red emergency lights, squinting, struggling to make sense of what they were seeing. Frost still clung to his lashes. His body trembled. Nobody moved. The entire quarantine bay held its breath. 23 Marithians, including 6 armed guards, a commandant watching through the security feed from the bridge, and a healer who had waited 7 years for this exact moment. All stood frozen as a pair of human eyes looked out at the world for the first time in nearly a decade. Danny tried to lift his head. He barely managed to raise it an inch before it fell back. His arms shook. His mouth opened, and a rough, dry sound came out. Not a word, just air moving through a throat that had not been used in years. One of the guards shifted his weight. The movement made a small sound against the metal floor. Danny's eyes snapped toward it with a speed that made everyone in the room flinch. For one terrible second, every Marithian in the bay saw exactly what the databases had warned them about. The reflexes, the predator awareness, the instant focused lock of a Death World hunter identifying a potential threat. Then Danny blinked. His eyes softened. He looked confused again, like someone waking from a dream they could not quite remember. "Lower your weapons," Olu said. Her voice was steady, though her hearts were pounding. "All of you, step back. Now." "Olu," Sever's voice came through the comm, tight and controlled. "Report. He is awake. He is weak. He is not a threat. I am opening the pod." "Olu, wait." She did not wait. She entered the release sequence on the cradle's control panel. The pod's seals hissed. The glass cover slid upward with a soft mechanical sound. Cool air rushed in, carrying the sharp smell of cryochemicals and something else underneath. Something warm and organic and alive. Danny flinched to the rush of air. He turned his head slowly and looked up, and he saw Olu, a tall figure standing over him. Blue skin that glowed faintly in the red light. 4 arms. Large dark eyes watching him with an expression he could not possibly read. An alien. Something completely outside every experience he had ever had. He should have screamed. He should have fought. He should have done any of the 100 things that a Category 9 apex predator waking in an unknown environment surrounded by unknown species was supposed to do. He looked at her. His cracked lips moved, and in a voice that sounded like gravel being dragged across stone, he said one word. "Hey." Olu almost laughed. She almost cried. She did neither. She leaned closer and said, in human English she had spent 3 years learning from the fragments of a ship's data core, "You are safe. My name is Olu. You are on a Marithian research vessel. You have been sleeping for a long time." Danny stared at her, processing. His eyes moved around the room, taking in the guards, the equipment, the flashing red lights. He looked back at Olu. "How long?" he whispered. "Nearly 7 of your years." Something crossed his face. A shadow. A grief so deep and sudden that Olu could see it hit him like a physical blow. 7 years. His ship. His crew. Everything he had known. His eyes grew wet. He closed them for a moment. His throat worked. When he opened them again, the grief was still there, but it was pushed down, held in place by something strong and deliberate. He was not falling apart. He was holding himself together through sheer force of will, even though his body could barely hold itself up. "My crew," he said. "Did anyone? You were the only survivor," Olu said gently. "I am sorry." He nodded once. Slowly, his jaw tightened. He said nothing for a long time. Then he looked at the guard nearest to him. The Marithian was young, trembling, weapon raised. Danny studied him for a moment with those brown eyes. Then he looked at Olu. "Could I have some water?" he asked. The guard nearly dropped his weapon. Finnick, standing at his console, let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for 7 years. From the bridge, Sever said nothing, but she did not order the containment protocols activated. Olu brought water. She held the container to his lips because his hand was shaking too badly to grip it. He drank slowly. When he finished, he closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Over the next several hours, Danny lay in the open pod and talked with Olu in short, quiet sentences. She told him where they were, what had happened, how they had found him. He listened. He asked questions. He did not raise his voice. He did not make any sudden movements. He was careful, as if he understood that every person in the room was afraid of him, and he was doing his best not to make it worse. At one point, he looked at Olu for a long time. His eyes searched her face as if looking for something he was not sure he would find. "You kept me alive," he said. It was not a question. "Yes." "For 7 years." "Yes." He closed his eyes. When he spoke again, his voice broke on the words. "Thank you. I owe you everything." Olu placed one of her hands over his. His skin was warm, warmer than anything she had ever touched. The warmth of a death world creature built to survive. "You owe me nothing," she said. "Rest now." Danny closed his eyes. This time, he was not frozen. He was just sleeping. And for the first time in 7 years, he was not alone. Nobody on the Gentle Passage was prepared for how quiet a human could be. The databases had described them as loud, aggressive, territorial. The crew expected roaring. They expected violence. They expected the sleeping predator to wake up and become the nightmare they had all been raised to fear. Instead, Danny Reeves sat on the edge of his open pod wrapped in a thermal blanket and asked Finnick how the food dispenser worked. The first week after the awakening was strange and tense and nothing like anyone had imagined. Danny could barely walk. His muscles had wasted during 7 years of cryo sleep, and even with the cradle's healing, his body needed time to remember how to move. Olu helped him take his first steps in the quarantine bay, her lower arms supporting his weight while he gripped the railing with shaking hands. The guards watched from a distance. They never put their weapons away completely, but after the first 3 days, they stopped pointing them at him. Danny noticed everything. He noticed the way crew members flinched when he turned too quickly. He noticed how they kept their distance in the corridors. He noticed the fear, and he did something none of them expected. He made himself small. Not physically, though by Marithian standards he was already shorter than most of them. He moved slowly. He kept his hands visible. He spoke softly. He asked before touching anything that it was Finnick who first realized what was happening. "He is managing us," Finnick told Olu one evening. "He knows we are afraid of him, and he is deliberately making himself less threatening. That is not predator behavior. That is empathy." On the 8th day, a food dispenser on the crew deck broke down. It was a minor malfunction, but the engineering team was busy with a hull inspection and the repair was low priority. Danny, who had been walking the corridors under guard for exercise, stopped beside the broken unit and looked at it. "Mind if I take a look?" he asked the nearest guard. The guard did not know what to say. Danny waited patiently. After a long, awkward silence, the guard called Severa. Severa called Olu. Olu came down to the crew deck and found Danny still standing beside the dispenser, hands in his pockets, waiting. "I was an engineer before," he said. "Survey ships, mostly. I fix things. It is kind of what I do." Olu looked at Severa through the comm screen. Severa sighed. "Let him try," the commandant said. Danny fixed the dispenser in 20 minutes using a bent piece of metal and a technique that the Marithian engineers later described as creative and slightly insane. When it hummed back to life and dispensed a tray of food correctly, the small crowd of crew members that had gathered to watch broke into surprised murmurs. Danny picked up the tray and offered it to the nearest Marithian, a young navigator who had been watching with wide eyes. "Hungry?" Danny asked. She took the tray. Her hands were trembling, but she took it. After that, things began to change. Slowly, carefully, the way a frozen river begins to melt from beneath the surface. Danny started spending time in the common areas. He taught Fennec a card game using pieces of scrap paper with hand-drawn symbols. Fennec lost every round and laughed harder each time. Danny sat with a crew member who had injured her arm during a maintenance accident and talked to her through the pain while Olu treated the wound that he told stories. Simple ones about his life before the survey mission, about his home, about the small, ordinary things that made up a human existence. He talked about food and weather and music and the dog he had grown up with as a child. The Marithians listened with fascination. None of this was in the database's 0.3 weeks after the awakening. Director Hali returned. His shuttle docked without warning. He boarded the Gentle Passage with a full military escort and a sealed order from the Marithian Council, granting him immediate custody of the human designated Danny Reeves. He walked to the quarantine bay, expecting to find a contained specimen. Instead, he found Danny sitting cross-legged on the floor of the common area, teaching a group of off-duty crew members how to fold paper into the shape of a bird. Fennec was beside him, holding up his own lopsided creation with all four arms and grinning. Hali stopped in the doorway. His veins flickered once, then went still. Severa was waiting for him. "Before you present your order," she said, "there is something you should know. As of this morning, I have formally classified Danny Reeves as a refugee under Marithian Protection Law, Section 14. I have also entered him into the crew registry of the Gentle Passage as a specialist consultant. He is now under my jurisdiction, not the Council's military division." Hali stared at her. "You do not have the authority. I have exactly the authority. Section 14 is clear. Any commanding officer may grant refugee status to a displaced individual found in their area of operation. Check the law, Director." Hali checked. The law was exactly as Severa described it. His veins flickered rapidly now, a sign of barely controlled anger. He turned to Danny, who had stood up from the floor and was watching the exchange quietly. The paper bird was still in his hand. "You," Hali said. "Do you understand what you are?" Danny looked at him for a long moment. Then he held out his hand. "I am Danny," he said. "Nice to meet you." Hali stared at the hand. Every instinct he had, every warning from every database he had ever read, told him not to touch the human. The hand of a Category 9 apex predator extended toward him in open air. Danny waited. He did not push. He did not move closer. He just held his hand out, steady and patient, and let Hali decide. After what felt like a very long time, Hali took his hand. Danny shook it gently, the way Olu had taught him Marithians greeted friends, not threats. Hali left without Danny. The Council, facing a growing public interest in the story of the sleeping human and the healer who saved him, did not push the matter further on the night after Hali departed. Danny and Olu sat together on the observation deck. The stars stretched out in every direction, cold and bright and endless. "Where are we going?" Danny asked. "I do not know," Olu said. "The next mission coordinates have not been assigned yet." Danny smiled. It was a small, tired smile, but it was real. "That is fine," he said. "I have been asleep for long enough. Wherever we're going, I would like to see it this time." Olu leaned her shoulder against his. He was warm. He was always warm. Years later, Marithian historians would record that the first formal contact between their species and humanity did not begin with a war or a treaty or a diplomatic summit. It began with a healer who refused to look away and a man who woke up and said, "Hey."